The topic of today's discussion is paradox navigation. Many of you probably read the book by Dave Ulrich, Victory Through Organization, where he also confirmed, his research confirmed that the ability for agile leaders to be ability to navigate paradox successfully has profoundly the most business impact, most impact on business outcome in organization. How can we effectively have the and thinking of the or thinking? How can we manage effectively short-term and long-term? How can we be people-focused and, of course, organization-focused as well? How can we innovate and focus on stability? How can we have efficiency and effectiveness at the same time? This is such a topic, such an important topic, and it's so challenging to achieve. So this is why I'm so thrilled to have our guest today from SD Works and a general support of SD Works, who will help us to shed some light on this issue. How can we drive a Formula One car and change tire at the same time? And now, without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jan Laurijssen, a senior researcher from SD Works. Jan and his team were working on a pan-European research on the exact topic, how we can successfully navigate paradoxes in HR, some practical applications, what is it that we can do so we are more effective and efficient at the same time in HR. On the panel, let's have a discussion. I have Isabelle the Wulf here with us. Isabelle is Director of Talent and Organization Development at Barco. So it's a delight and privilege having you here with us, Isabelle. John Ingham, you probably, many of you familiar with John being an influencer, a blogger, an expert, subject matter expert, researcher on HR topics. So John is here with us to talk about, to dive a bit deeper to these ideas. What are some of the paradoxes companies are facing and how we are managing these paradoxes. So Isabelle, when we had the question and answers below, and I refer to our discussion about when we talk about skilling employees. So I'd like to start with you. Let's start with the first question in terms of what are some of the paradoxes that you've faced in HR in the last 18 months, especially since the pandemic has started, and how have you been handling those paradoxes?
Hi. Okay. Thank you, Mihaly, for the question and for the invitation, and hello to everybody. I think we experienced many paradoxes, and I think it's important to mention that it's not an or, but it's an and it's the ability in HR to be agile and resilient enough to combine both. One of the paradoxes I would like to start off with for Barco, as we are a global company or a global organization, it's the paradox of the differences in speed and in the change curve that we had throughout this COVID crisis. And we're looking back into the COVID crisis. We had teams throughout the world who were in an acute crisis phase and other teams already preparing a post-COVID period. Fortunately or unfortunately for my colleagues in China, they were the first to enter the crisis. So that means that we as an HR team, we were very reactive and accelerated really fast in bringing a global HR crisis team together as of January or end of January, beginning of February, so that we monitored really fast every step, every phase of the crisis. But it is not easy. It's a big challenge as well for the global HR team and for our business leaders, definitely, to see that throughout our organization, different teams are going through different phases of this pandemic. And it requires a lot of flexibility and agility in HR to be both reactive and proactive, to look both into what do we need to do in this acute crisis mode to keep people healthy and well, and at the same time not to lose sight of the longer term. So that reactiveness and proactiveness, that paradox was there definitely as well. I think by having a global HR team, having the right roles within the organization or the HR organization, our HR operational model, confirmed, in fact, that our HR role, that we have a seat at the table, that we can deliver on the short time operational day-to-day business, and being able to look into the future and prepare for post-COVID. So in order to bring value to our internal customer, to our business. So the major paradoxes that we experienced was with paradox of speed, or the different phases, and the paradox of being reactive and proactive at the same time.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. I appreciate that. John, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of your research? You talking, keeping your fingers on the pulse of the HR profession. Some of the paradoxes and ideas you've seen floating around.
Well, I think Jan and Isabelle have definitely identified some of the most important. I mean, the key thing for me is there were more of them, or at least I noticed them more. I mean, you were talking about Dave Ulrich's competencies from the last review, and when he first introduced paradox navigation 5 years ago, I didn't really get it, and it's only over the last sort of 6 months to a year that I've really sort of got into paradox very seriously, just in time for him to now move on to the new competency and start talking about something else, of course. So yeah, I see them everywhere. I mean, the key one to me, which started before COVID really, but is more about digital transformation and the future of work and so on, was this sort of key one about the ambidextrous organization, particularly explore and exploit, to exploit the existing business opportunities, but to explore new opportunities as well. So that's been growing in importance, and I think the book on that was sort of 5-10 years old now, so it's not a new idea, but COVID has definitely brought it to the center of many businesses, and certainly for me, and I'm a very different business to the people on the call, but working independently, I did lots of face-to-face training. All of that stopped at the beginning of the lockdown. And therefore, I've set up this new digital academy, which is my main focus today. And I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about doing for 5 years, but would have had to stop doing what I was doing, cannibalize that existing business to do something new, which is the problem that so many organizations do. And therefore, it wasn't until sort of COVID forced my hand that I had the opportunity to do that. And on a larger scale, I think that's the big issue that many organizations have been confronting. And in terms of HR, I think those two ways of doing exploit and explore are often sort of kept separate, which is why organizations set up innovation labs and all of these sort of things, which I don't think actually work that well. So to me, because again, that's a or way of separating these, whereas actually what we need is an and. So how do we keep the existing functional hierarchies and apply a more distributed network on top of that to enable people to do their functional roles and participate in organizational innovation as well? Yeah, I could go on, but that's probably enough. And that's enough.
Interesting paradox popped in my mind while I was listening to you, John, as well, and also Isabelle, about looking at the whole pandemic and the COVID situation and have this and or thinking. Is COVID or pandemic in your case, is it a threat or opportunity, or rather threat and opportunity? What's your view on that? And perhaps Jan as well, you work with clients as well. How do you see organizations? On one hand, of course, it's a threat, so we need to take care of employees' well-being, psychological safety, but also creates an opportunity to do something which, as in your case and in our case as well, we have not anticipated that much, or we didn't put that much of a focus. So from the threat kind of made it as an opportunity. How do you capitalize on the pandemic, which is bestowed upon us as use it both as a threat, so come up with the right solution to combat the threat, and use it as an opportunity to springboard for something more?
Well, I think, and John was already referring to that, I think a lot of organizations has used it as an opportunity also to see how they can adopt and adapt to a changing context and use technology to collaborate and so on, which basically what John was saying. So yes, that is the case. So we've seen also in these exceptional circumstances that we have been able to continue to work. Some of us have less work and so on, but that we've been able to do that. At the same time, in terms of threat, and the longer that the pandemic is continuing, I don't know how you guys are feeling, but every time that I'm in a Zoom, a Teams meeting, or in a Hopin or whatever, I'm also reminded of the fact how much fun it was to get together and to see what we could do. So there is definitely an opportunity, and what I said in terms of technology, in terms of efficiency, also finding efficiency, that has been a great step up. That's the one thing. The other thing also, I think that what we found, or what our colleagues at Antwerp Management School found, is actually trust from leaders in employees has grown throughout the COVID, where we before still had the idea of control versus control in teleworking was still a big issue, not maybe in all countries, but still in Belgium it was. We've seen that this has grown, so trust has grown. So there are definitely also upsides on this COVID, but looking now is that how long can we continue to do that? Looking at, if you look at how much people, organizations are longing to come out of their houses again. So how long can we continue to do this? So yes, opportunity. We've seen some optimistic signs. At the same time, the question, threat. How long can we keep on doing it this way?
I would like to build further on that. So I agree, it's definitely an opportunity. And in many cases in our organization, this crisis has been an accelerator or an enabler to accelerate some of the things that we were already working on, such as digitization, but definitely as well, as Jan referred to, our leadership and purposeful leadership, and having leaders that are able to empower and to connect with their teams, even throughout in remote working. So for us, it has been an eye-opener that this crisis can be used to accelerate some of the things that we already started up with and that we need to continue on. And we see now in the organization that the longing for going back to the office and meeting each other again in face-to-face, is there. So there is a lot of eagerness to meet again face to face, and I think that is one of the advantages that this crisis has given us, that we see the value again in meeting in face to face. And digitization is really good, but for me it's an enabler to connect, and it's not an end to or an end goal to digitize. It should enable you as a business to realize your objectives, your strategy, etc. But the true value is in that human connection, I believe.
How far have we advanced? How far have we leapfrogged in the future in terms of digitization as a result of the pandemic in your case, Isabelle? And what do you see, Jan, among your clients?
Well, I think, like I said, I think there's a huge difference in the leaps that have been taken by different companies, and a lot had to do with the extent to which organizations were already digitized before, in the case of Belgium, March 13th. So if you were, in terms of hardware, software, connectivity, and so on, if you were well equipped, you actually jumped on faster, and you actually adopted even more throughout the crisis, more digital processes. If the basics weren't right, it still was struggling for a number of organizations to be able to do that. Also, in terms of very basic maybe tasks, Isabelle, maybe John can refer to that as well. It's like connecting with people. Some people still don't have the tools when they're in unemployment to communicate with people. Some people don't have even email addresses, employees. So that's something that we should be thinking about. Those are the basics also that can help us to move on. And that, so the acceleration, probably the benefits were the highest with the organizations that were already prepared before March or whatever the crisis hit in their country.
I think for Barco, in the majority of the regions we are in, we already had good basics, so that we just needed to put them into practice even more. So yeah, definitely on the remote collaboration, we have gained a lot of experience now on meeting culture as well. I think for us as an HR, a global HR team, we always thought that we were very inclusive, but it wasn't until the moment that we were all forced to dial in from home that we felt that we were really inclusive during a meeting, listening to each other, because there was not one small team together in a meeting room and then a few other people dialing in. And I think there the tools really helped us. So yeah, it was again an acceleration of the basics that was already there.
John, is there anything you'd like to add? Okay. I can't hear you, at least. Can't hear you.
Apologies. Just to agree, really, and a whole heap of paradoxes involved in this as well, aren't there? You know, the more remote we are, the more we need to be together, working at home, back in the office, digital, face-to-face. The other one I'd add to it is synchronous and asynchronous. You know, that I think we've still got to get to grips with that as well, that not every meeting that used to be done face-to-face needs to be done in Zoom or Teams. You know, it's like here, you know, the conversation between us, great, but the asynchronous chat, you know, it really adds, and we need to use the power of doing that as well.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask Isabelle a question. Actually, John put in the chat box earlier, and I said we're going to come back to it during the panel, was about job design, between designing for business and designing for the individual. So here's the opportunity. We'd like to take advantage of the opportunity that you're here with us. What do you do in this regards as a paradox?
Well, my first reflex definitely is that you start from your organization and you design jobs for your organization, because you have your organizational purpose, your strategy, the objectives that you want to reach. And at the same time, yeah, you need to, as already mentioned in the chat, you need to work on your talent management, your internal mobility, to make sure that people know and are put in places where they can work on their talents. What we learned from this COVID crisis is that we had some teams where the workload was really decreasing or even stopped and they did not have job anymore. Other teams had a really increase of workload. So we managed really quickly to look into this and organize some temporary redeployments internally. There we saw that some people show talents or competences that we weren't aware of. So that internal mobility, that temporary redeployment, gave us some insights on how we could make sure that the job that we designed for the organization fit the people. Now, at the same time, when doing recruitments and finding the scarce talents on the market, sometimes you see talents for which you do not have the job yet in your organization. And there, I think it's really important to keep your eyes and your ears open and to stay curious for what you can find as talents on the market. And I think I saw in the chat somebody mentioning Gen Z. So I think as an organization, in order to be really ready for the future and open to change and innovate, you need to be open to welcome people that perhaps do not fit the jobs yet that you have today, but the jobs that you will have for tomorrow. So if you only design jobs for your organization today, I'm not sure that you as an organization will build enough on the future. So for me, it's really both.
Yeah, thank you, Isabelle. If you ladies and gentlemen have any questions, please do keep putting in the chat box and then we'll ask the panelists. Interesting question from Maxine is, we talk about navigating paradox, but what does it mean practically, strategically, and operationally beyond the rhetoric of and?
Could you have a quick repeat on that? Because
so basically we're talking about paradox navigation.
Yeah.
How can we achieve it effectively from a practical point of view? How shall we deal with paradox from strategic, from operational, strategically and operationally?
Yeah, I saw that coming on also in the chat, and looking at beyond the rhetoric. I think that Isabelle already referred to that in terms of talent management and talent mobility. That is really the strategic and the practical implementation of looking at talent management. That means that we have to be aware of the fact that succession planning as we knew it, just replacing people or having someone ready to replace someone on a certain spot, is no longer there. It means that we have to acknowledge the fact that that job that needs to be filled in a while will be different, and that the people that are ready maybe, or that are putting up or standing up to do that, may not be ready either. So it's a very it's the very tricky thing of trying to prepare, and that's what I liked about what Isabelle said, trying to prepare for something that you don't know yet. It's the discussion also about the future skills. We know more or less what they are, but hell, we don't know exactly what they are. So we're going to have to find ways to choose for the things that we know and that we think will keep being important. And at the same time, we're going to have to, like Isabelle said, we have to bet on people and making sure that we keep them on board for something that might emerge in some time, but is not there yet. So it's the balancing act. And yes, I agree. It's not just a rhetoric. It is to some point rhetoric, but it's at the same time very practical, looking at where are we moving, how can we put the pieces together, how can we play on the chessboard, making sure that we are ready, that we prepare the organization for the future, and that we also have the supply. Right. So basically for me, it's also looking at, can we estimate, forecast the demand of competencies, capabilities, and can we also then make sure that we find the supply internally or externally to meet those demands in terms of competencies and capabilities. If that is an answer.
Thank you, Jan. Isabelle, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I agree with Jan. I think
Okay.
it's both. Yeah.
Let me ask the last.
John was smiling. I was.
Yes, what I like to ask, and coming back to the threat and opportunity, one thing which is emerging is the threat of attrition, voluntarily turnover. Speaking with Josh Bersin and many others, research are confirming that now, as we're getting closer to the end of the pandemic, it is likely that attrition will increase. So how can we, well, what can we do in organizations to combat potentially the loss of critical talent? How can we use this information to create an opportunity to really preserve our best employees and preserve the best of our culture? So how can we prepare for this attrition, tsunami of attrition, some say?
Do I start? In my opinion, I think it's from an HR perspective, making sure that you work both on building your daily organization as good as it is to work in, and keeping an eye on the longer term. So what is our purpose as an organization? Where are we going to? And communicate on that purpose, because what we see is many people throughout this crisis are asking themselves some existential questions. What is my own purpose, and do I still fit in this organization? And in order to keep people on board, I think you need to be very open and transparent and authentic on your purpose as an organization, on your purpose as a leader as well. I think leadership has an important impact on this, so that people still feel welcome and feel at place in the organization they work in. So for me, it's really investing in that longer term purpose of the organization, and definitely as well keeping or making sure that you keep your employees well, and that you keep investing in talent and talent development.
Thank you. Jan, would you like to add your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, referring also to what we said about data and analytics, it also means that you have to be very aware of the fact that you need data about your people. You need to know your people, and data can help you with that. And that does mean that talking to people once a year for your performance it's not enough. You need to know your people, and as Isabelle said, you need to know what they like to do, what their talents are, where they want to go, what they worry about, what drives them personally. In order to find that fit, so that you can also invest in that, making sure that they find new paths in the organization, and at the same time also being ready for the fact, and that's also where data can help, for the fact that people will actually leave, and that maybe that's also not for the worst. That's a choice, and maybe it'll come back. But at least there we can see that predicting, forecasting, whatever, using data to have an insight on that, I think that's the most important thing. Because yes, it might be that there'll be a war for the war for talent wasn't over, by the way. It never was, but it's just gonna flare up again in the next coming months. At the same time, mobility in the labor market is very different across countries, as we saw in earlier research, referring to my own country. I mean, mobility is not really an issue. The immobility is actually the norm in this country. So we're going to have to look at how it works. But if you're referring to George Burson and such, yeah, I think that in the Anglo-Saxon world, US, Britain, that might be very different, or at least we see some other trends there. John.
Indeed.
For me, well, so I agree with Isabelle. The long-term, short-term paradox is important. I agree with Jan. Data. Perhaps the opposite polarity there might be intuition, which I think gets less attention in HR these days, but you know, we deal with people and relationships, so that to me is still important. The big one, I'd agree with Sadhan in the chat actually. The biggest paradox, I think, underpinning everything we've been talking about really is between people and the business. Or people and the business. So on the business perspective, I think the managing through the tsunami of attrition is about being clear, you know, again, Isabelle's point on purpose, and linking to paradox, which is the point I put in the chat previously. The more we can explore paradox, the better we can start to understand what our purpose is, which is what I think one of the practical applications of this conversation is as well. And then on the people side, I think we do need to get deeper, as Sadhan suggests. You know, what can the organization do for your employees or with the individual employee? Because I think sometimes we interpret employee experience as how can you have the best possible experience while still doing what we need as the business. And I suspect that doesn't go far enough these days. I think we need to start really understanding our employees' drives and motivations and find ways that they can do work, which is useful. I mean, there still needs to be a business result, but things that they can do that helps them achieve their purpose rather than simply, you know, ways that they can better achieve results for the business. We need to go beyond that, I think.
Mm. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, of course, that's why technology is potentially here to help. And now we learned in the pandemic that people can work from wherever they want, whenever they want, and their engagement level will not necessarily drop. Their result, their performance will not drop. But of course, future is probably hybrid. So what do you see, Jan, and what do you see, Isabelle? Of course, from your perspective, I'm sure that you do have in-depth discussions around how people will come back to the office. It's going to be hybrid, it's going to be more remote, it's more freedom. What will be the future of work from that point of view?
Well, there was an interesting article by Nikki Dries, who's a professor in Leuven, who said it depends from the point of view who's talking. meaning that HR managers will probably look different at that than consultants, for instance. But what we see happening is that, first of all, I think that we'll go to a completely different divide in working from the office and working from home. So 50-50 or working 60% from home, 40% at the office, I think will be in a lot of service organizations will become the norm. That's one. Secondly, the idea is, why do we come together? Well, we'll come together to do stuff together. So the moments that we are there, we're not there to open up our laptop, get under a headset and start typing. We need to do something then together that's also value added, so that it's worthwhile to do the way to the office and to get together. So that's a really important thing. And three, I think that there's still a lot of opportunity to look at what we can do hybrid. So even that if it's interesting to bring in people, what Isabelle also referred to, is definitely in international companies, how can we invest in technology that helps us to make the experience of being there and not being there, overcoming that as much as possible. And there are interesting things that we can see there, so that it's more and more possible to see people on larger screens, that they also have a good view, that we actually can integrate that, and whether you are there does not matter so much anymore. But there again, we're looking at maybe referring to the paradox of efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, that's probably those hybrid ways are going to both help us on the efficient side. Not everybody's going to have to commute or have to fly or whatever. And at the same time, technology will help us to actually see one face to face in a normal situation with good communication, with good audio. That may be helpful. I think those three are most important in returning to work in on a short while. And let's not forget that there have been people working at the office, at the plant throughout the COVID. So that probably will be the fourth thing, is how are we going to reconcile again or work together when people are coming back to the office and our colleagues have been working at the plant all the time. We do see that there is some let's say tension on that matter throughout the COVID, and that we actually going to have to reconcile that after the COVID or in the next coming months.
Mm-hmm. For Barco, I think fortunately we have the solutions. We offer it to the market for hybrid collaboration and hybrid learning with our digital classroom and our ClickShare conference solutions that we sell to the market. So we are lucky to be able to use it internally at Barco as well. So that gives us the opportunity to have a good experience in hybrid collaborating. Now, hybrid, it's top of mind and top of discussion at this very moment at Barco. We see a tendency not to go towards the extreme of many service organizations of saying, okay, it's full employee flexibility, working remotely. We are an organization with a lot of R&D engineers and people working together, brainstorming together to get that creative, innovative, new ideas. So bringing people together in the office and combining it with collaborating with the people in other regions working on the same solutions, that is for us the true hybrid. But our organization, our office remains for us very important to bring people together and to make people enthusiastic about it as well. It's the value add to go to the office, to meet people, to go into dialogue, to have new ideas, to chat at a coffee machine, but then afterwards to gain some new insights and work further on that. So I think we as Barco, we will definitely go towards a more balanced approach. And then I would like to end with what Jan said as well. Please let us not forget that in many organizations there were people that had to stay and work in the office or in operations, for instance, in big organizations where you have a lot of blue collar workers, for instance, who continued to work. And I think that is another paradox that we had in HR, that we had to deal with people working from home and remotely, and people in our factories and on the work floors. So let's not forget it. And yes, I think it could be something to look into once everybody's coming back to the office and working hybrid remotely. Is there any imbalance between those different groups, people with different roles, being able to work from home, not able to work from home? So that is definitely something to look into and take into account.
John, is there anything you'd like to add?
The other paradox here is individual and collaborative work. So I think a lot of the conversation about the return to the office focuses on people working individually and how they want to work and how the business wants to work. The other big piece of it is the other people they work with. So I think increasingly we need to approach the issue by thinking about the teams, the communities, the networks that people operate within, and the different ways that those operate. You know, if you're working in a functional team, you don't really need to be together that much because most of your work is individual. If you're in a community, you know, much more need to spend face-to-face time. So I think organizations need to prioritize from a collaborative perspective as well as the individual one.
The last question with the closing question, what I like to ask is about the heroes and the heroines of the organization, the HR leaders and HR professionals themselves. Many of you have spoken with, on one hand, overwhelmed with initiatives, on the other hand, massively overworked in the last 18 months. Everybody's working longer hours than ever before, and they really need to keep the operation, maintain momentum going. But in the meantime, should find time for thinking and strategizing and planning how we are coming back once the pandemic is over. So some practical advice, what can HR leaders do? What can HR professionals do to navigate this paradox of living the now in a momentum, as well as find time to think and strategize in the foreseeable future beyond this current situation?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? No, but I think that what we see is, first of all, I think that people have been responding to the crisis. Organizations have been responding to crises, and that means that you have to do crisis management. So you have to do. And we've seen throughout the COVID that whenever that things we got a lockdown situation, or things were afterwards we're getting improvement, that's the moment where actually we should be very aware of the fact that we should relaunch initiatives, think again, re-strategize to make sure that we can get people back on board. But during a crisis, basically it's doing and making and following procedure and making sure that we can cope with it. And it's maybe once we've seen that the situation is improving, or once governments are loosening up on measures, that it's time to sit back again and look at what can we do afterwards. And I think also that that's something that we've seen throughout the COVID pandemic, that after the first lockdown, we saw strategizing again, we're going to do stuff. Okay, but we have to pull back because there's a second one. And now I think after this third height of the pandemic, I think a lot of organizations are actually prepared and are asking the right questions to get to grips with this new situations, are preparing for coming back to the office, hybrid working. But it's only now. And I mean, that's a year after that's been happening. And now it's again time to see that we don't, fall in the trap to do actually the only thing is reactiveness, but that we should start to do proactiveness and start taking time in our agendas. And also, Isabelle, I hope you can add to that, that HR is actually also sitting back again and thinking how we're going to cope with the next thing that's around, not the next corner, but around the fifth corner that's coming up.
Yeah, and we never stopped doing that. And I think that is one of the answers for me. How did we cope as an HR team throughout this crisis, is to continue to do what we do and where we bring value. And it's not only on the day-to-day operations, but it's on thinking of the future as well, because every crisis has an end. And if you don't prepare for what kind of organization you want to be, and what kind of people and culture and kind of collaboration that you want to have, if you do not work on that today, where will you end up once the crisis is over? So that is one thing that I would like to emphasize. So we continue to do what we are good at and where we know that we bring value to our business. Secondly, we had a very strong governance within HR to meet very regularly with the different roles, to talk to each other, to be very transparent on what we are doing, what we are planning, when we would be doing what, so that the HR team was really aware of what everybody in the different roles was doing. And I think that transparency really helped to understand each other and to know sometimes, oh, I can't ask a question to Isabelle today because she is involved in this or in that. And to be authentic and vulnerable. I know that sounds a bit buzzwords, but to be able to say, I have a bad day and I don't manage well today, and can you listen to me? And as an HR team, we really managed well in doing those kind of small check-ins with each other to find out how we felt and to help each other throughout this crisis. So yeah, small things, but listening, being authentic and sometimes vulnerable, and having that meeting and collaboration culture going on, and valuing each other in one's role that you have and the impact that you have, smaller or bigger. Everybody is important in this. So that was a bit my 5 cents.
John, is there anything you'd like to add?
Mine would be to remember to lead as well as support. We always have a lot of support activities to undertake, but we understand the sort of people issues that we've been talking about very often more than a lot of the other leaders in the rest of the business. So we need to be helping our businesses move into this more people-centered age, which is both sort of more things to fit in, but in a sense, the more successful we can be in doing that, the more that these other problems we're facing currently starts to go away. And I guess the other response to that would be come to the next mastermind session on the 17th of June, where we're going to be talking about that topic.
Indeed, keep sharpening yourself. Indeed, keep sharpening yourself. Well, I don't know if HR leaders, practitioners on the call, I mean, I really appreciate finding this time for this session and our sessions during your busy schedule. I don't know if you hear often enough, but I'd like to thank to everybody for the amazing work you do, because it's not just the value, we always talk about value delivered to the business. It's not about that. It's a value delivered to people and people's families and friends, and the impact you make outside the organization. That's eventually what I'm hoping, and that's exactly what I'm doing, because we're creating a better place by creating better workplaces and creating a better world. So thank you, all of you, from the bottom of my heart. And of course, thanks everybody for being here with us in this late hour. For many of you, especially, I know we have quite a few people from Asia as well, being here with us on this call. And thank you, our panelists, for this wonderful exchange of ideas. I hope everybody enjoyed and learned and gained something new, insights and ideas. Recordings and slides will be available. It will be shared with you actually tomorrow once we are working through the process, and you will watch it, rewatch it, and please share it within your organizations as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Isabelle. Thank you, Jan and John, being here with us.
Thank you.
And
That's my
with
pleasure.
this, we conclude this mastermind session. And as John said, we are back on the 17th of June with yet another session. Thank you. Take care. Goodbye.